I am so excited for this final session of season 1 of the Black Gives Back conversations, and thrilled to have today's guest, Charisse Conanan Johnson. Charisse, the original Wealthy Girl, is author of A Wealthy Girl, 7 Steps to Prosperity, Peace, and Personal Power. Charisse is a wealth expert, investor, business strategist, public speaker, and TV personality. She's also a chartered financial analyst, and as such, she's the managing partner and head of the advisory practice at Next Street. Next Street is a mission-oriented firm that is mobilizing how public and private clients provide more capital, customers, and services to entrepreneurs and small businesses that have been systematically held back. Some of her clients include the Obama Foundation, City of Columbus, and Walgreens. If that's not enough, Charisse is also the creator of the Charisse Says platform, which includes the Charisse Says show and Charisse Says online academy. And then finally, Charisse has been featured as a financial expert on TD Ameritrade and Experian and Huffington Post, and finally, American Express Open Forum. I am so thrilled and honored and humbled to have you with us today, Charisse. And I shared with you already, like, I'm so excited, I don't know where to start, but I'm going to open us with a quote from your book, a question from your book. And let me show the book. This is the book. Yes, yes. So everyone go get your copy. And so I'll open it with this, a question from Charisse. As you think about the generation above you and the one below you, how can you be that girl who builds wealth for those around you? And what a powerful question. I want to pause there and welcome you and turn it over to you so I don't keep yammering on. Welcome, Charisse.
Oh my, well, Regina, it is an honor and a pleasure to be here. I'm grateful for the opportunity for this conversation. Like you, I have been excited and eagerly anticipating the discussion that we're going to have today. I am thrilled because this topic around wealth and celebrating Black philanthropy is so near and dear to my heart. And I've tried to live a life to be that girl, right? To be the one that looks back to the generation behind me and looks forward to the generation coming after me. And just to even share, I was with my grandmother, my mom, and my daughter about 2 weeks ago as we celebrated 4 generations of wealthy girls. And
Awesome.
So I'm just bringing that energy and excitement and spirit into us right now. And so just thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. I received that energy. I don't know about everyone else out there in the internet universe, but I received that energy. So I'm going to like dive in with
dive in.
First, this caveat. Like, I'm so excited and thrilled that we're kind of both coming from the assumption of, there is Black wealth. Like, Black wealth does exist. And so I think we can have a different, like, we could just get right into that. We don't have to explain or give examples or whatever. Black wealth exists. And it's not just Oprah, and it's not just, Bob Smith, all those types of people. It's not just Tyler Perry. Black wealth exists all over, everywhere. And so really excited about some of the things that you write about in your book, especially the wealth circles and wealth pots. So I'm kind of like starting there, and also really curious about your experience as like in the financial world and working with in and amongst Black's wealth and facilitating Black wealth for common good and public benefit.
Yeah. Whew, all of that. Let's go there. And maybe I'll start with the last part of your question and move toward the first couple of comments around wealth circle and wealth pot, because it's my financial background and experiences that set the stage really for me to think about wealth and what does it mean to truly have it, and how do we define it, right? And so I spent the earlier part of my career at JP Morgan, and I went there because I wanted to learn how to invest. I wanted to learn how this thing called money makes more money. And that was inspired because when I was in undergrad, I went to Yale University, and it was the first time in my life that there seemed to be so much, not just the dollars of money, but truly wealth in the traditional sense, meaning that, you know, the dollars that you have in your assets, whether it's stocks or bonds or cash or owning a business, minus what you have in terms of your debt and liabilities, you know, you subtract one from the other, the debt from the assets, and you get your wealth at any point in time. And there was a lot of that. But what Yale also taught me is that there's also these other elements of wealth, these relationships, this cultural capital about exposure. And I saw Black people with that kind of wealth, and I was like, oh my gosh, you know, that really didn't, you know, become a part of my experience up until that time period. But what I always knew, though, is that from my culture and my family, that there were these strong bonds and strong relationships, and that does mean wealth. You know, we might not have had the full tangible ones at that time, but we had the chutzpah, the entrepreneur spirit, and, you know, the sole proprietorships. And so when I went to Wall Street and now was immersed in this culture, this definition of, you know, what does it mean to manage assets on behalf of other people, and then learning how to, you know, make money from the stock market, I was like, oh snap. This is how the world is working, and doing so on behalf of large institutional clients, maybe just aware of the responsibility, the fiduciary responsibility that one had and that I had in managing this kind of wealth and being really in relationship with people, with institutions, to keep it going and preserve it. And so as I then moved on to in my career, I was very interested in not just the financial markets, but this entrepreneurial, you know, environments. And as I started reading and getting my own bearings on like what that meant as well, one of the things that stuck out to me is that, you know, wealth just doesn't come from your individual efforts, right? It comes because, you know, people support you. You are a part of a larger community. You might not have all the skill sets, but if you can surround yourself with people that do, us, particularly as Black people, can leverage that in its totality. And so you mentioned this concept of a wealth circle, right? A wealth circle in its simplest form is that people getting together, and usually it could be 6, 8, 10 people, all for the benefit of growing each other's wealth, you know, holistically defined, making sure that we understand each other's goals and that we continue to push the group forward. It's upon the belief that the group also and its success is just, if not more important than individual success, right? And that is a principle rooted in our history. You know, you think about the JAMA principle, which is about extended family and cooperative economics, you know, from Swahili. And even in this country, during the Reconstruction era, we had mutual aid societies, which really were the predecessors to what I'm talking about in terms of wealth circles, where Black folk got together and pooled our money and pooled our relationships and invested in the businesses when the banks wouldn't give us a loan, when we couldn't get the equity capital. Fast forward to today, I'm arguing that these wealth circles are important, again, to shepherding those dreams, those wealth goals amongst each other, and how can we pull those resources, pull those talents to do so. And that relates to a wealth pot. You know, my family has, I'm in several wealth circles, but one I have with my family, and we created a wealth pot, which means that we are pulling our actual dollars into one pot and redistributing those dollars. If you're from the West Indian culture, or even some of the Asian cultures, you might know this as a susu,
Mhm.
where money gets pulled and gets rotated amongst each other. But that system is built on trust and relational capital. And that too is one way to exercise the power of a wealth circle.
Oh, just also powerful, also powerful. A couple of things that stand out for me. One is the idea that wealth takes teamwork. Wealth is a collective
Yes,
activity, wealth
yes,
building rather. And so that really does, like, that's the polar opposite of sort of this American culture of like
right,
individualism and I'm going to hustle and grind and I'm going to get my money, I'm going to get the bag, etc.
yeah,
And then I might look back and help someone
that's
if
right,
that happened to help me along the
that's
way.
right, that's right.
um so I just want to like call that out, like that wealth is most definitely wealth building and creating that community legacy of wealth is
That's right.
definitely a collective action. And the other piece around wealth circles, so
Yes,
I love that the focus on that is we are all growing our wealth individually. Like we're supporting each other and we have this community and this collective, but it's still growing our individual wealth. And then comparing that to like a giving circle.
mhm,
So a wealth circle is where you build your wealth.
yeah,
And then sort of the giving circle, they could overlap, but then the
yep,
giving circle is where you now we're being intentional about sharing this wealth.
that's right.
um, and so I love those. Just wanted to call out those parallels
Yep,
and how that can overlap. And really, the other thing that kind of stood out for me from some of the passages in your book was around wealthy experiments.
yes,
And so that resonates with me as an entrepreneur because I'm in a space where I'm like, I'm going to experiment a little bit.
that's right.
Like let's try some things now. Like, okay, I feel okay. Let's now I can play around a little bit.
That's right.
Um, but the idea of experimenting with wealth is really, I don't know, that was a bit jarring for me.
Yes.
It was-
Glad, right? Sometimes you need to be shook up a little bit, right? You know,
yes.
and as it's funny that you mentioned this because I was even struggling with, do I put that in the book? You know, and do I put it out there in that way? And as I was talking to, different readers, beta readers, or my publisher, they said, yeah, this is something here to this. And, just to level set here, what is a wealthy experiment, right? Most people are familiar with the concept of experimentation. They're familiar with a scientific experiment. And let me take you back if you're not, right? A
Mhm.
scientific experiment, you're trying to get to a certain outcome and you have a hypothesis or a belief that, that outcome will be a certain way, but you got to test that. You got to figure out if that hypothesis or that belief is true, right? So you go about the process of running your test and confirming whether that hypothesis is true or disconfirming that it's true. Both are equally valid because then you have your answer. Do you need to go back to the drawing board or do you need to then move forward because your hypothesis is right? And so you take that framework and you apply wealthy experimentation to it. And ultimately, now you're gearing for a wealthy outcome, whether it is a tangible wealthy outcome or an intangible wealthy outcome. And wealthy experiment then is the art of testing, growing, learning as you're moving toward that wealthy outcome to figure out if that hypothesis that you thought to get there is true or not. Underlying this concept is really the trait of courage.
Yes.
Underlying this concept is, bucking away the fear or at least moving into it, even though, you might be scared. Underlying
Mhm.
this concept is the action of trying again if something doesn't work and embracing that reality that if I'm going to get this wealth that I so much want, let's go out and try again.
Yes, yes. And so I would love to like step back a little bit and like hear your definition of wealth.
Yes. So, Whew. My definition of wealth is so much more than that traditional definition that I spoke about just a little earlier. You know, traditionally, an economist, and I was an economist major in college, right? And so if anyone is going to challenge traditional definition of wealth, it's probably not going to be me. However, I took my background too in understanding that, you know, wealth as defined again as those assets minus liabilities equals your wealth or net worth, as some people like to say, at any point in time. And so I want to encourage people to think about wealth so much more than that. Yes, that's your tangible wealth, but the intangible assets that we have, our relationships, our faith, our exposure to different experiences, our health, right? If you're not healthy, it's really hard to go out and go get some wealth in the tangible sense. But all of these intangible things, it's hard to put a price tag on them, but in its totality, they give us that power. They give us that peace. They give us really the thing that we're striving toward, which is freedom, independence, opportunity, and ultimately wealth. The two go hand in hand. One feeds off the other. It's hard to get tangible wealth without the intangible wealth in terms of the assets. And it's hard to get sometimes the intangible without the tangible in order to kind of see those connections between folks. One of the reasons why I wanted to blow the traditional definition of wealth up is because the traditional definition of wealth doesn't account for the history, particularly in this country, of institutional racism, the history that has affected subdominant cultures historically, and subdominant cultures are non-white cultures, Black and brown folks, women, you know, people of the LGBTQ community. If we just stick on race and ethnicity for a second, if the traditional definition of wealth takes your assets minus your liabilities, and one of the biggest assets in this country, while people have built their wealth on, is their house, their real estate, right? We know very well from even documented in the color of law that discriminatory practices rooted in racism prevented Black people historically for so many generations from getting housing mortgages. You know, the GI Bill didn't allow us to do that. You know, we weren't the recipients of incentives to go out and own our land. After Reconstruction, 40 acres and a mule didn't quite happen in the way that it was intended to happen. And so how should and why should we measure ourselves by that standard of wealth if we were locked out historically, constitutionally, legally from obtaining it? And that is the point I want to make. And that definition of wealth doesn't suit me as a Black female. It doesn't suit my people. And so I wanted to have a definition actually that encompasses our totality in the way that we live and move about the world, and the way that we leverage our relationships and create the wealth and personal power and peace that we so often want to get.
Yes, 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 yes. So I would love to hear your response to, like, oftentimes when I'm having conversations with people in different communities about wealth and the wealth that we have within as Black people and the power we have with our charitable dollars, I'm usually met with, these facts around, African Americans having negative net worth, the disparities in net worth. And I would love to hear your response to that. Like, I know what my thoughts are around it, but I would love to hear your response to that. And because it's typically presented, those facts are presented in a way or as evidence that, well, no, you really don't have the wealth and you can't pull the wealth. So
right.
what are your thoughts in response to those?
Sure.
That commentary.
Yeah, the commentary, and I mean, it's everywhere, right? We read probably all the time these days that the median wealth of white families is 10 times the wealth of Black families and like 7 times the wealth of Latino families. And those are the facts, right? Again, it does not take into account, though, some of the root causes of those facts. And it leaves us wondering, how can we break down those definitions a bit further, definitely in terms of the asset side of the house, but also in terms of the liability side of the house. And it is a deficit mindset, right? I lack having as much wealth as my white counterparts. And again, while the numbers might be what they are, they're not contextualized in some of the reasons why. And so again, if once we shift that to that more holistic definition, we begin to see other ways in which we have generated wealth and really pooling those relationships or pooling that cultural capital or pooling that faith in order to obtain some of the actual tangible wealth. And so we have many examples in our community, and this gets to, your underlying, I think, belief too, that we are a giving people and we have the assets to, participate in philanthropic efforts. You take even the example of a church tithe, which in our community, in the Black community, the Black church is an important institution. And many of us are giving to that institution to the tune of, 10% or some way around that. That is philanthropy, right? That's not showing up in the asset side of the equation. It's not showing up in the liability side of the equation. It's sort of missed because that those dollars are coming out of your pocket, perhaps every single week.
Right.
I think what we saw too, and historically during Reconstruction, when you had those mutual aid societies, when you had self-sufficient communities that were supporting the entrepreneurial efforts, that were supporting, families who wanted to buy a house, again, when the system had locked them out, you saw the emergence of very strong communal activity. And you don't even look so far, one of those communities in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we just celebrated the centennial, last year around all of the collective economic wealth building activity that comes when we put our resources together, when we actually make conscious decisions, right? And these decisions might be rooted in, let's share the knowledge of, we might not want to get that kind of debt financing because it will stretch our balance sheet. Sharing the information, right? We might not want to take that business loan because of the super high interest rate that is, let us do that for you. And so I think it's, a lack of understanding some of the historical context. I think it's a lack of looking at examples where we have actually had the ability, the desire to create wealth. And it's a narrative in our country that is rooted in a deficit mindset. And so I think we need to expose more of the examples that really get to the holistic definition, but also share the knowledge amongst each other so that we can actually get to the wealth. We can't stay in those statistics. They're depressing. And unless there's huge structural reform to our country and the tax code and the ways that money and capital move within our systems and structures, that number is going to stay what it is. And what are we to do? We can't stay there. We have to move forward. And the ways that we're going to move forward are the ways that we have been talking about.
Yes. Like over here, like taking notes and like, yes, mental follow up. And so something you spoke of earlier, sort of that oh snap moment, like when you first started at Yale, and sort of that oh snap, this is how money works. This is how the world works. And so that reminds me of like my own like oh snap moment when I first graduated from college and started working my first, my first job, my first postgraduate job in fundraising. And it was sort of that moment of oh snap, this is how it works.
That's right.
I want to do this. But then also coupled with this like internal, like, I need to share this information.
Yes.
I need to take this back. And
Yes.
so in many ways, I think that's a form of philanthropy.
Yes.
And just curious about your own, like your own drive, to share the knowledge that that you obtain, your expertise, etc.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're hitting right to the heart, right, of an intangible asset, which is the knowledge transfer, knowledge sharing. And again, for our communities, the art of storytelling
Mhm.
and being able to share experiences, particularly when it was illegal for us to read and write. And, my family's from the South, and, my grandmother and grandfather, their parents were slaves, and it was a crime to read and write. And so the oral tradition of sharing information and passing things on so we can be better and the generations coming after us can be better. I think that is so important. That is one of the reasons why I wrote the book, right? I didn't want to keep it to myself. In a
Yes.
way that I thought would encourage not just my daughter, who is a wealthy girl, but all of our daughters and all of our sisters and all of our mothers and all of our grandmothers. There is power in making sure that you succeed, right? Because if you succeed, we all succeed. And that is a shift in mind frame, right? That is a shift that is not westernized culture, which, as you mentioned before, is rooted in the individual. But my drive is to make sure that people are empowered. I think life on this earth is so short, and there shouldn't be an excuse, well, I didn't know, or I didn't understand. We have a responsibility to make sure ours know and ours understand, right? I write on a weekly blog at charisses.com, and folks can come on and read for free. And I share some of these stories and tips, but also the stories of others, because we have so much to learn from our collective experiences that contributes to this wealth building of sharing the knowledge and sharing the information, because that's how we get better.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also helps us to like defeat that deficit mindset.
Yes.
Like sometimes you just need the information. And if you are part of that population that has negative net worth, or, I would say living check to check, but so many of us are, and without,
Yes.
it doesn't matter. But if you're in a situation where you feel like you don't have an abundance of dollars, let me put it that way,
Yes.
um, you can still be aspirational. You
That's
can
right.
still understand the other forms of wealth that you
That's right.
possess,
That's right.
and
And
then like activate those.
absolutely. And starting small, right? I mean,
Mhm.
so many people are, will have the mindset like, I don't have this extra capacity for my paycheck, or I don't have a silver spoon in my mouth, or I
Mhm.
don't have, the wealth of white people in the same way on that tangible. But like we were saying, right? We do have these relationships, we do have this knowledge. Let's run a little wealthy experiment. What would happen if you change some of your behavior around this particular item just for a month? Just for a month.
Yeah.
See what happens, right? Let's say what would happen if you threw some of your money in an acorns account, which rounds up the dollars and invest in the stock market. We're not talking about thousands of dollars. We're talking about the extra change from a purchase that gets rounded up just to see what it would do in the market,
Mhm.
right? Just to give you a little exposure, a little excitement about, man, maybe my money will grow in that way. And you test that out a little bit, run a little wealthy experiment there. And now, you made some changes in how you're allocating your dollars. I feel strongly about that. And you begin to, shift how you just move about the world, and, pass that wealth of information onward. That's how we start to, truly get to behavior change, but also mindset shift, and
Mhm.
realize our power, right? This is about power. This is about the personal power that we have, which leads to the collective power, which leads to the peace of mind where we're not so inundated about what we lack or what we can't control. But let's focus on what we have and what we can control, and do it to the best of our ability.
Yeah. And when you talk about power, to me, that kind of you've spoken about it a couple of times as a form of wealth, your faith and your spirituality. And so when you talk about the power and the abundance mindset, for me, that is like in a direct alignment with like your spirituality in the way that you move about as a spiritual being. And so if you're comfortable sharing, I would love to hear a little about how wealth, or not wealth, but how faith shows up as a wealth indicator for you in some ways. And you talk about this a little bit in your book as well. And so in the passages that I've read, I certainly have picked up on your faith is ever present in your life. And so I would love to hear about that a little more, again, as a source of wealth.
And you're absolutely right. This book is called, A Wealthy Girl, but 7 steps to prosperity, peace, and personal power. And one of the steps to obtain the wealth, prosperity, peace, and personal power is faith. And I am unapologetically Christian. And as we define faith, faith is the substance of things hoped for, right? But the evidence of things unseen. And that's from the Bible. That's not my own quote, right? But even if you have a different religious underpinning, or you might be an atheist, which is fine. You have to find the thing that moves you. But I think where the parallels come in, and where we all can feel some kind of connection, is this idea of hope, right? The aspirational of things that we can't see yet, or see the result yet, but we're trying to move toward that thing anyway. That is the essence of faith. And it's recognizing too that there is some power greater than you that is helping you move to that thing, that wealthy outcome, the thing that you're hoping for. And for me, this has been an underpinning since I was a child, just because of the family environment that I had been raised in, but also beginning to understand and develop my own, what I call faith muscle. If you have been an athlete in your past, or can appreciate sports, even if you're not an athlete, I was a track runner since I was 5, all through high school. And as I got older, I wanted to have like a nice built body, right? I wanted like the runners I saw, like FloJo, like she was like so inspiring for me, because she had cut arms and cut legs, was like super feminine in terms of her nails and her hair and her outfits. I'm like, yes, girl, do it. Right.
I think we all wanted to be her for a little while.
Right. FloJo, world record holder. But she had these muscles that we saw on screen, in the Olympics, or even in the other track meets. But what we didn't see is her practicing. We didn't have YouTube back then. We couldn't like dive into like, seeing her in the weight room. But FloJo didn't start out with a cut body. She had to work her way through getting those muscles. It's the same thing with our faith. We have to work our way into our faith, sharpening it, testing out different situations, because faith, when you possess it, which is, keep trying to go and believing in the things that you cannot see yet, you begin to get very strong when setbacks come, when the outcomes are different than you expect it to be. And so that is why faith is so important to wealth, because if I'm going to try to get to that wealthy outcome, again, defined by me, and I can't see that wealthy outcome yet, it is my faith that's going to propel me to keep going despite the circumstances, or take a pivot in light of the circumstances, lean on the support of others, because I don't have all the answers on my own, and what I like to say, defying statistics. In the book, I share a story of my own journey to pregnancy, and it's something that I wanted very bad. My husband and I wanted very bad, and it wasn't happening for us. And we were like, man, this is tough, right? And having a child, that's one of those intangible assets, and if it might be it was a child for me, it might be, something else for you in terms of intangible. But when the outcome wasn't seeming to be where I wanted it to be, I had to rely on my faith to really carry me through to get to that outcome. And then I had to take action, believing that that will come. And so for us, we had fertility challenges, and we went to a fertility specialist, and we went through the process of going through what's called IUI, intrauterine insemination. And ultimately, we were able to conceive and have our beautiful daughter, whose name means strength of God, because she is the manifestation of our faith. Her middle name is Grace, because that is the grace that has been poured upon us. And so without the faith, there will be no movement toward the outcome. That's why faith is so important to wealth.
Yes, thank you for that praise report.
Yes. And let me tell you, Regina, that I did not want to write about faith in a wealth book, but my faith is actually then came around to me and said, no, you need to write about this, because people need to know, and people need to, I need to be vulnerable enough to share also the power of that faith.
Yes. And I appreciate that. So often, as like an entrepreneur, my business is 5 years old and it's growing, and people see that growth, and they see the successes, and they wonder, some people will ask, how do you do it? What are you doing? Did you hire a coach? How are you making this happen? And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. It's nothing but God. Like, it's like I'm doing something, like I'm here, I'm showing up, but really this is my faith. This is the result of prayers, on my knees, pleading, and prayers and faith. The faith that even though what it looks like today, I absolutely know that abundance is waiting for me. So I definitely appreciate that, and appreciate you calling that out. And as you described, like faith, and talked about the faith muscle and the hope that, is infused in that, it reminds me of philanthropy. Like I hadn't really thought about philanthropy being an act of faith.
Oof.
And so it certainly is. Like I am sowing.
See? You
Yes, but this idea of I am sowing assets, tangible, sometimes it's my time, talent, treasure. I'm sowing into something, an impact that I have not yet seen.
That's right.
But I have faith in it. And so there is a level so often in my world of philanthropy and in the nonprofit sector, faith and spirituality is separated from professional fundraising.
Absolutely. And I'll be interesting to know too. I feel when I was on Wall Street and in the work that I have now in the impact space, I have been around a lot of folks in the Jewish community, right? And I feel like probably not even of any, because I think we obviously as our Black community, we share many of the same tenets, but their philanthropic efforts are often tied to their religious and faith beliefs in terms of what God has purposed for them to do.
Yes.
They might not talk about it that way. You might not know it was, the underpinnings of why they did a certain thing. But I do think that there are lessons there. And I think, even as you said, that philanthropy as a action around faith, I think that is so true, because you don't know yet how that money will impact, the future, but yet you're hoping that it will do so in a positive way.
Yes. Yeah. especially like with plan giving. Now I'm thinking like people that leave their estates to different organizations and leave, different causes in their will, etc. And there's something else that I wanted to call out from the passages that I read. So this idea of Black money or Black wealth being a private affair, and needing to be private. And so I just wanted to call that out quickly as we get ready to wrap up. But the idea that the way that money and wealth accumulates and is distributed historically has had to be a private affair. And so you talked about Texas. And so we know that absolutely there is the ability to build, accumulate, wealth and ownership and all of those agency, and all of those things. And that, the US government at different times has employed tactics, different branches of the government has employed tactics to
and still now
to like physically remove those assets, whether or not, whatever those assets may be. And so this idea of Black wealth and Black giving as well, needing to be done in private, needing to be done, maybe not so much a secret because we know it's going on, but the need for it to happen outside of some of these more traditional structures.
Yeah. I mean, I think there for sure needs to be a shift in that, right? I think the more that we begin to see, hear, experience examples of Black wealth on the outside, the more that we're encouraged to not be ashamed of our own experiences. And I think this is the heart of the matter. I think while sometimes it's so private, is because we might believe that we're not worthy, right? And that worth, that's reinforced by the media, again, our, political environment, our social constructs of race, that allow us to not feel that we're worth the wealth. But the more that we start to shout out loud, the more that you have conversations like this that spread and showcase and share to push us forward in, what you're arguing, a more public effort, I think the more that we begin to shout, yes, and claim, I'm a wealthy girl, you're a wealthy girl, and I deserve to be wealthy. Right. And I have the skill set. And if I don't have every single skill set, which I don't need, you don't need every single skill set.
Right.
Surround yourself with the people who have it, and really help guide you along the way. The better we'll be at that shift and realizing our power and realizing the potential for us to have more than we could ever imagine.
Yes. I love that you called out the worth. I mean, that gave me chills a little bit. So there's sort of this like external value, the value that the world puts on us.
Yeah.
But then there's also this internal value that we don't often address. We do on an individual level, like, self-help, your girl, go girl, you're, whatever. But that worth and really digging into that and questioning that. And so I'm encountering that again as on my entrepreneurial journey, like starting to bump up against that one internally, one like, wow, am I really, is this okay? Like, am I,
right.
it is. It is okay.
That's right. And I mean, we need, and there are examples out here like this. They're just not as front and center because of the industry, right? I think of right now, we're going through the US Open tournament. I'm a tennis fan, and you know where I'm going, right? We've all heard that Serena Williams is set to retire. And as someone who played tennis in high school at the same time as Serena, I mean, I'm not as good as Serena, for sure. Clearly. But Serena is, in her own, living out her purpose of being a tennis player. And when you look at the early videos of Serena and Venus, right? That famous question of, Serena, who do you want to be like? She was like, well, I want people to be like me. And, that
Yes.
worth, that is why I think she is and her family are beloved, because they leaned into their self-worth early and
Mhm.
have seen the manifestation of that worth externally. That I think, there are lessons for that for all of us in tapping into that worth and believing it and having others believe it in you, because there's no Venus and Serena without their mother and their daddy,
Right.
without their siblings, without those coaching folks around them that constantly reiterated, you are worthy, you're the best, you're gonna do it, right? Here's what you need to do, right? They didn't do that on their own. They had a whole community around them that and now the world global community that continues to pour in them, and then they pour out into others to pass it forward.
Yes. Yes. And so then that brings me back to the opening quotes.
Yes, yes.
As you think about the generation above you and the one below you, how can you be that girl who builds wealth for those around you?
Mm, mm.
Charisse, it has been an absolute pleasure. Like, I thought I was going to spend the rest of my afternoon, like, kind of relaxed and have some downtime. I am charged.
Be charged, girl. Be charged. You wealthy girl, and it's time
Yes, I
for.
am wealthy. I am
Yes,
going forth and
that's right.
creating legacy,
That's
building
right.
legacy.
That's
So
right.
it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for joining the Black Gives Back conversation series.
Regina, thank you so much for having me. It has been a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. I don't count it on accident in how we have come together. And I wish you all the best in sharing the wealth with those around you.
Thank you.